So first up, we're going to have Laurel Blossom. For those who may not be familiar to Laurel, you are actually familiar to her if you were in any way a part of the YMCA Writer's Voice. She was a big part of it, along with Jason Schinder, myself, Corey, maybe not Corey. Corby's probably, hopefully, out there watching. She was the person behind the writers community, which, you know, there's a lot to tell with that story in Detroit, because one of our first writing community people was Thomas Lynch. And at that time, Tom was working on a little book that became The Undertaking. And from that book, he was nominated for a National Book Award. So that was the very beginning of the Detroit version of the writers community. And Linda Nemec Foster did one over the time that we had at W.D. Earhart. We had a bunch of people come into town, and many of you were part of those classes. So she's the author of a new book. It's called UN, Poems About Esther Williams. She also has two four-way books, Longevity and Degrees of Latitude, which is a poem where she went to the Arctic and on a ship, which is unbelievable. Earlier books of lyric poetry include, among others, Wednesday, New and Selected Poems, The Paper Said, selected as a notable a book of poetry on Shelf Unbound. Blossom is the editor of Splash. This was a book we gave away to many people as part of the Writer's Voice. Great writing about swimming. She's very much a swimmer. And Many Lights and Many Windows, 20 years of great fiction and poetry from her Writers Community Program. She was the Poet Laureate of Edgefield, South Carolina, where she lives. She's now out living in Los Angeles. And you can find her on laurelblossom.com. Please welcome Laurel Blossom.
Thank you, ML. That was a great introduction. Thank you for this series. This is wonderful. And thank you all for being here. This is really terrific. Great turnout. And I'm really looking forward to reading and reading with Charlie Baxter and Jack Riddle. So thank you all very, very much. I will mostly be reading from this little chapbook called newly published by Finishing Line Press. But before I do that, I wanted to read a couple of poems from this book called Wednesday, New and Selected Poems. And it was published actually by our host, ML Liebler, through the Ridgeway Press and as a part of the Writer's Voice program in Detroit. So I am very proud of it, and I'm going to start with that. You know, we've all been through a lot of traumas in our lifetimes. Every generation seems to have its defining moment, and my generation's defining moment was President Kennedy's death and the following deaths of Martin Luther King and Bobby. But I wrote a poem about President Kennedy's death, and the only thing you need to know about it that's in there is a reference to a man named Rolando Cubella, who was a CIA contact in the 60s. The poem is called Where Were You? I was walking the dog. I was washing the dishes. I was coming back from lunch. I was going to lunch. I was in the bookstore. People were whispering. I was walking across campus. I was in arithmetic. They handed Mrs. Lesser a note. I was 4 years old. I wasn't born yet. The Senegalese would come to our bungalow, shake hands, stand around a few minutes, shake our hands again, and leave. Everything stopped. I was coming up out of a manhole. This lady was standing on the corner, crying. I was on an airplane on my way to Japan. We were driving to New Haven for the Yale game. It was the saddest Thanksgiving. I just prayed it wasn't a black man who did it. I was supposed to go out to dinner. I was at the movies. The lights came on. I was in Vietnam. I was putting the baby down for a nap. I was rehearsing. I was in a motel room. It had an orange shag rug and an olive green bedspread. We were supposed to be having some meetings. I was buying a necklace I never wear anymore. I was playing hooky. I was swabbing the deck. I was meeting with Rolando Cubella. I was putting the magazine to bed. I was crossing the border. It was evening. It was morning. It was midday. It was night. I was having my nails done. I was taking an order from this guy who wanted his toast toasted just on one side. I was paying the phone bill. I heard the word shot. My daughter was getting married. I was selling Fuller brushes. This lady opened the door in her bathrobe. She was sobbing. Well, I thought to myself, that's a new one. I was sharpening pencils. I was reading Life magazine on the bus. My grandmother said, I don't want to live in this world anymore. We were playing poker. We were playing pool. We were playing cowboys and Indians. I was changing the sheets. I was changing a light bulb. I was changing my clothes. I was changing a 20. I was changing lanes. It was my last day at work. It was payday. I was watching TV. I ordered a drink. I called my mother. Everybody stood around so they could hear the radio. I turned on TV. I turned the TV on. I turned on TV. I turned on TV. I turned the TV on. Most of us lived through 9/11. This poem was written on the first anniversary of that event. It's called Almost Biblical. The wind was blowing so hard today. The sky bright blue again, but the air more humid. There were whitecaps in the harbor. It was Wednesday. A day like any other day, except no planes were flying overhead. The wind was blowing so hard today, a small fishing boat capsized in the bay, killing its owner, Victor Amesquita, his 3 companions injured. There were whitecaps in the harbor. It was Wednesday, all day. The names lifted away even as they were spoken. It was almost biblical, Marion said. The wind was blowing so hard today, a tree limb fell on 13 New Jersey teenagers. A construction worker was knocked out by a piece of winged plywood. There were whitecaps in the harbor. It was Wednesday. Gusts were stronger than on any but 2 or 3 days a year. Damage was exceptionally widespread. The wind was blowing so hard today, there were whitecaps in the harbor. But at least it wasn't Tuesday. It was Wednesday. Those events were sort of, momentary-ish events, though they had, of course, long-term repercussions. But we've been through a pandemic before, and this poem is for my friends Gregory, Chuck, and John. Not like skin cloddishly dripping off the bone of the A-bomb victim or the unrecognizable man who's lost too much weight too fast. Not like the prow of a woman's not like the prow of a woman's face in the wind, wrinkles splayed back to the blue-black hairline, lips clamped in a facelift's ferocious grin. But so gradual, so slow, so long a degradation. The skin had time to scale itself down, to thin, to adjust to the daylight shining through the petals of the white peonies in the bedroom. They were so beautiful, diaphanous as chiffon. One day a breeze came up in the conversation. We turned to speak of it, but you were gone. So this little chapbook is a series of short prose poems about the search for one of Esther Williams's understudies. I don't suppose there's anybody in this audience who doesn't remember who Esther Williams was, but in case, she was a swimming champion and a major motion picture star in 1950s Hollywood. The opening poem of the series is called Esther and Willow. This is the pool, set halfway between the guest house and the main house, built by Mrs. Godfrey in 1941, the year Esther Williams started at MGM. I swim on the diagonal to make a length a little longer. The water's warm where the LA sun has touched it, cool where it floats in shade. I'm taking my first swim in Mrs. Godfrey's pool. My landlord, Al, says Mrs. Godfrey was one of Esther Williams's understudies. The guest house is white, the sky blue, the house at the corner of Esther and Willow. Al says this is a coincidence. I don't believe him. Coincidence is a myth. Culver City. If you come to the end of Motor Avenue, where it stops at Sony Pictures, you can see how the building goes on for blocks. Behind it, once, the original MGM backlots, sound stages, Stage 30, the enormous tank designed for Esther Williams, complete with special effects and underwater dollies. I was on my way to see my friend Jane, 10 minutes from Mrs. Godfrey's house. Jane walked me past the old Hollywood fake antebellum mansion that had been David Selznick's studio, across the street from the Culver Hotel, once owned by John Wayne, where Judy Garland and the Munchkins stayed. Victor Fleming had only a few short blocks to walk after finishing Gone with the Wind at Selznick Studios to take over The Wizard of Oz at MGM, 1939. Billy Rose's Aquacade opened in New York. Esther Williams turned 18. Jane says her landlady went to high school with Esther Williams. She says people with in-ground pools treat her like dirt because she works at a pool place. When she kept books for the accountant, people treated her with respect. By the sea, by the sea. We went to the beach. My granddaughter said she understood why the waves were quiet, because they worked so hard all night. My grandson said he wanted to go in the deep end. My son-in-law doesn't know who Esther Williams was. Mansion on the beach. All that's left of the mansion on the beach is the beach, the ocean, the guest house, and the pool. When William Randolph Hearst undertook to develop the property for Marion Davies, the water came up very nearly to the guest house door. Now it's half a mile away across the sand. How did that happen? Did the ocean somewhere else swallow half a mile of coastline? Some people think the ocean's like a blanket. If one person pulls more of it over to his side of the bed, doesn't the other uncovered person lie there, freezing? In Marion Davies' pool. You had just learned to put your head underwater. Kick, 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 come up for breath, push the hair every time away from your goggles, little pink fish eyes, talking, instructing. The pool was tiled with waves and little fishes, seahorses and gold. I loved you. It was like being able to see you in the womb. Let's blow bubbles underwater. Clap hands underwater. Touch the bottom with our feet. Touch the bottom with our hands. Swim to the ladder. You stay there, Granty. Let me swim to you. Closer. Swim to you farther. Swim to you closer and better and farther and farther until, little fish, you are that quick, grown and gone. Somersault. I showed you how to do a somersault. I pushed your little body in a circle underwater. I said, this is how it feels to do a somersault, because that's how you learn, by how it feels. The first word Helen Keller ever said was water. You all know that